Hi guys, welcome back to Z's Corner. This is Al. So I've been kind of busy lately, so I haven't had much time to do videos. So it's been a few days, and I apologize for that. I've been doing some recording as well in preparation for a video on basically how to counter the new mitigation officers. So that one's kind of in the works. But before we go into that, I wanted to post hopefully a really quick video around, again, mitigation calculation, because in my last video, which was really all about mitigation, I made a mistake and I basically left out something that was really important, and it is something that we'll term or we'll coin as a multiplier. It in the end, when I was looking at all the data, it didn't really change anything significantly. It changed some of the mitigation calculations by a few percentage points, which, while still important, is not as significant as if it kind of reversed the entire picture of what I was trying to portray. And for the most part, it was okay. It was only one scenario where I had been kind of on the fence on anyway, where it kind of changed that scenario, and we'll talk about that once we get there. So anyway, without further ado, let's kind of look at what I mean by the multiplier. And that's just kind of the overview that's going to explain, we're looking at the multipliers and some examples. Basically, the examples are the same ones that we looked at in the previous video in Lower Decks Part 2. We're going to review the equation. So fortunately for me, the multiplier, which I left out of my previous mitigation equation or mitigation video, actually doesn't really change the basic equation. The basic equation is still the same for battleships, explorers, interceptors, and surveys. Well, neutrals, actually. So, and, Hugo was helpful in pointing out that, armadas are also considered to be neutral, which I did not say in the previous video as well. So, anyway, we'll kind of go through these real quick. You see, some of the base constants are the same. I mean, we haven't changed anything at all from Lower Decks Part 2, which you can check out if you haven't already. And so we're on to multipliers. So really, what exactly is like a multiplier? So when you're utilizing a mitigation or the new or the counter officers, you need to take into account a special multiplier, which is essentially, if you boil it down to your research. Okay, it's basically what your research is, in addition to whatever your officer proc is. So let's say if you have a Max Marcus. So it's 1600% to shield pierce. If you have 10,000 in total defense, because that's the ability proc for Marcus on your ship, then it's not simply just 16 times 10,000. There's also something else that's a multiplier that you need to multiply it by. And you say, why is this? This is kind of hidden. It's not really shown in the game. But why is it that you need to do this? It's because it's actually, if you look at the basic equation, if we look at the equation before, up top, we basically said here, so, the sum of armor or the sum of armor piercing here, or the sum of shield piercings I was talking about, Marcus. The sum of shield piercing, but I didn't really go into details in terms of what the sum of shield piercing looks like. And the sum of shield piercing is basically, all this stuff. It has a lot of information here, and you have a base number that needs to be multiplied into, which is essentially a bunch of percentages. Right? But basically, since we're kind of cheating and taking the values directly from the ship detail screen, we definitely need the multiplier. And that's because in the ship detail screen in the game, it only takes whatever research and territory services and projectile ability, whatever stuff you have that's already applied to the ship at that second, and it doesn't take into account abilities that proc during battle. So because of that, we need this multiplier. So I've highlighted in red basically a couple of things that are really going to be affected by these multipliers. All right. So one is definitely going to be the officer ability, something like Marcus, which is the counter officer, or some of the new mitigation officers. Let's say Max is 16 times whatever the total stat proc is on the ship, let's say 10,000, and then multiply by whatever this multiplier is. And we'll go over how to calculate the multiplier in a bit. And then the ship ability right here, which is only applicable to a few ships, including my Corvus, also needs to kind of be taken into account, although at a kind of differently, right? So the ship ability of the Corvus is basically a cumulative increase to all piercing stats with every single hit that I take. And with that, how that kind of affects this equation right here is basically on two fronts, right? So one, it will affect the multiplier. So in a little tiny bit with each hit that I take, since it's a cumulative effect and it stacks, it will slowly, very, very slowly increase the multiplier. Then that then also is needed to calculate the officer ability. But since most fights are over pretty quickly, and this overall increase is not too significant, we'll just kind of disregard it for now. And then the other thing is that when you look at this in terms of the total, let's say shield pierce that you're doing with Marcus, and that the ship ability, then the total number changes with each round as well. So let's say your base was 10,000 and my ship ability right now is about 70%. It's cumulative per hit. So for the first hit that I get, you need to add an additional 17,000 to shield pierce in the example that we were working with Marcus. So 17,000 in the grand scheme of things for a Corvus is actually not that much, but it does work with every hit. So, and it's also cumulative. So the next time I get hit, it's not 17,000. It's an additional 140%. So 2.4 times 10,000. So it's an additional 24,000. So, the longer the rounds go, actually the higher and more significant this becomes. Now, fortunately for us right now, most of our PvP fights with these officers are over in 2 rounds or 4 rounds or something like that. Now, as a side note though, when you're doing PvE, this type of ship ability is actually great, especially for things that go really long like armadas. It might help you to the point where you might be able to change your classic armada crew that we use in deep space, which is 5 captain with 6 on the side and con, to maybe 5 captain with 7 on the side, because remember 7's abilities is increase in health for the total ship, so you can actually get more mitigation. So that's something I haven't really tested, and we might test some time later. But so anyway, this is actually pretty complicated. I hope what I explained kind of makes sense, especially on how ship ability, especially when it's like a cumulative thing. A significant part is going to be the officer ability here that I overlooked in the last video, which is why we're talking about it today. So how do you kind of calculate the multiplier? Here's an example on a Corvus. So here's the in-game value that you get from the ship detail screen, and right here, if I have one thing to ask Scopely, I would say please give us exact values on things like on very large numbers, because the rounding system in the game is pretty bad, because it shows 3 million, so I put 3 million here, but honestly it could be 3,999,999 and it would still show 3 million in the game. So this could be off by a lot, but I'm just going to work with what I'm given. So anyway, so in-game value, this is the ship detail screen right here. This is the base value for tier 4 Corvus, which is what I have. And this you can, well, what I do is I basically just look it up on STFC.space. It just makes it a lot easier. So, and then what you do is you take the in-game value and then divide it by the base value. So this is the multiplier. And, newsflash, essentially what the multiplier is your research. Again, I put in the slides here. If this is the North Cut, and Baller, I see you have great mitigation research right here, because your armor, shield deflection, dodge, all that stuff is 13. It's significantly higher than what I'm at for most of my numbers, except for shield deflection on the Corvus. So anyway, this is the North Cut. You can see that again, some of these numbers, again, Scopely, please, this is way off, 3 million, it could be 3,999,999. This is showing 1 million, it could be 1,999,999. So I wish I could get better numbers than that from Scopely, and hopefully they can do that with a patch at some point in the future. And then again, I kind of went into the G3 Epic world for you guys as well. So this is kind of the multipliers on the G3 Epics, and these are with my ships. And you'll note that they're different than what they're showing on the Corvus and the North Cut and things like that. It's different by ship, and that's because the research for G3 ships caps out at a certain level. It's basically well, it's actually technically it would be 49 because a lot of the territory research caps out at 49, and some of the and most of the territory research in that middle tree right there basically is applicable to all ships. This is kind of what it looks like for an auger as well. So now that we've really talked about the multipliers, let's look at some of the questions that basically are the same from the last video. So one, how counter officers reduce mitigation. Two, how mitigation officers restore mitigation. Three, how necessary are counter officers when you're fighting with the combat triangle and the opponent does not have a mitigation officer on the bridge. And then the last but not least, in which cases would utilizing mitigation officer make sense to increase secondary mitigation for overall mitigation. So first off, how counter officers really work. So in a neutral scenario of enterprise versus enterprise with Marcus, and then the opponent not having any type of mitigation officer, their basic mitigation gets dropped pretty low. It's 18%, And again, remember the minimum the mitigation can reach for these ships is like 17.2%. So it's really close to the minimum. Now, without Marcus, though, the mitigation on a neutral to reverse neutral type ship is pretty high. It's 58.92%. So basically, you see that this number has dropped. It used to be like 19-something% without the multiplier. Now it's down to 18% with the multiplier. So it does affect it, by 1 to 2 percentage points or more. Again, this is the second question, how mitigation officer restore mitigation. So this hasn't changed. This is 18% if you're fighting with Marcus, and then if you're being attacked with Marcus and you are the defender and you don't have Gowron on. So your still mitigation is at basically 18%. Now, if you throw on Gowron, and because of the multiplier, this used to be only like 43%. With the multiplier, now it's at up to 47%. So it has a bit of an impact. And, this is not as good as 58.9, but it's still pretty darn good. Almost half that damage is being mitigated right away with Gowron. It's really kind of showcasing how good these new mitigation officers are. Basically, they're almost completely countering the counter officers, and without the counter officers, we're basically going to loop back into a scenario where we have to focus on something else. Probably more like breach and damage, or some other aspects, or maybe like Harrison will kind of come into play a bit more with our crewing. So this is really definitely a big change to the PvP scene. This is the third question. Are counter officers necessary when fighting with the triangle? This is the auger versus the enterprise. So let's say, I'm attacking with Marcus. If I'm using the auger as the attacker and the enterprise as the defender, mitigation with Marcus is at 19.5%. If I just randomly pick the Kang, then it's at 27.3%. So in this case, definitely use Marcus. Don't try to use a secondary type of counter officer here. So now this is a second example of G5 ships, Corvus versus Northcutt, and you can see attacking with Kang is only marginally better than attacking with Charvonic, and this is kind of a unique example, and it's mostly because the accuracy level of the Corvus is so freaking high. It's at 3 million. So in this scenario, I just don't know how much applicability it has in real world terms, because I really wouldn't change my officers from Kang to Charvonic, mostly because Kang has Hull Breach when he's captain. So that's a huge damage boost, and I don't think I would change anything. So this is the last question. Does maxing secondary mitigation officer make sense? If you look at this, enterprise versus auger, here I would say no, because with Bael being the direct counter to Charvonic, you're at a significant, like over almost like 13% points of increased mitigation. So in this scenario where you have the same level of officers, same level of ships, it doesn't really make sense. However, if you look at this, and this is what I was talking about last time, if you are fighting a higher ops player, or you're against someone with a bigger ship or better officers or whatever, and you're fighting at a disadvantage, you're going to lose no matter how high you try and go with your primary mitigation stat. You might as well just kind of say, I'll just stick with whatever armor I have, which is pretty darn good anyway on the auger, and I will just go use a secondary mitigation stat. So in this case, if you're fighting up and you're at a disadvantage in terms of officers and things like that, or even ship tiers, then maybe going with a secondary mitigation would then make sense. So this is the last example, and this is where you kind of see the difference, because in the previous video I said that mitigating with a secondary officer sometimes made sense because they were about the same. But with the multipliers in effect now, you can see that the disparity is huge. It's basically 10% disparity. So basically go with the direct counter to the attack officers that are being used, and you'll be better off in this case. So in terms of implications, I would say for, all ships G3 and G5, use your direct counter officers and mitigation officers as necessary. Lower decks, focus on maxing officers, bonuses for set officers. And then again, when you're fighting higher ops players, it may be beneficial to use a secondary mitigation officer. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and thank you to Sudo really for helping me out with the multipliers and pointing out that there was something I missed. I hadn't even noticed it, and I had to really think through as to why there would be something like a multiplier and how it was totally hidden from the game. So anyway, thanks to Sudo for doing this. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you're not a subscriber, please hit the subscribe button. And if you have any other comments, please feel free to leave below, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks.